I'm going to be discussing books I read so far this month. I've read 5 books, and 4 of those 5 have been on my backlist for quite some time. So let's go ahead and dive right on into this video. The first book that I read was Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is mainly historical fiction with some science fiction woven into it. It was first published in 1979, and it's about a black woman named Dana who travels back in time from the 1970s to the antebellum era in 1815. She has no control over her time traveling. Each time she's thrown into the past, she's tasked with saving the same white person over and over again, and each time she appears to him, he grows just a little bit older. Dana doesn't hesitate in saving him from these life-threatening situations because she figures out that he's her ancestor. So she's like, oh man, she can't just like let him die, or else she'll jeopardize her own survival. This was an exceptional story. It just punches you right in the gut. It examines the institution of slavery in all of its sick and twisted forms. And it does this through the lens of a modern black woman from the 60s. She's pretty much stranded in the past, and she doesn't know when she'll return to her own time period. She is confronted with an extremely violent and backward-thinking world, and instead of, like broadcasting that she's from the future, she instead tries to like blend in, and for her this means that she has to pretend to be a slave. So as you can probably imagine, this in itself is already a nightmarish situation that she has to endure. So in order to survive, she goes through all of these horrific experiences where all her freedoms are stripped away from her. She's talked down to, and she's heavily mistreated by white people who just think that they're superior. She's experiencing firsthand what her ancestors suffered through. She bears witness to the unnecessary separation of black families. She was such a strong character to read, and I just really love this book. I gave it 5 stars out of 5 stars. Then I read Warbreaker by Sanderson. This book follows 2 sisters named Suri and Vivenna, and they're both princesses of this nation called Idris, and Idris is in a delicate situation with another nation called Haladrin, and in order to uphold a peace treaty between the two, the king of Idris must send one of his daughters to Haladrin to marry the God King. Everyone was expecting the king to send his eldest daughter Vivenna because she has been trained her whole life for this, but her father couldn't go through with it, and he instead sends his youngest daughter Suri in her place. So from this point on, the 2 sisters go on their own paths, and it's so interesting seeing the sort of role reversals and how each of them handles their unexpected roles. So things start moving in motion. There's a lot of political maneuvering. Both women are just trying to survive the circumstances they are in. The world that we are in is called Nothis, and it's so dynamic with an extremely unique magic system. There's people called Awakeners who use this thing called biochromatic breath to bring objects to life. The colors that they see are enhanced. There's a couple of other things that they can do that are kind of major hints for all the overlaps of the Cosmo universe. The best part about reading these books that take place in this universe is just trying to make connections and figure out which characters cross over and spill over onto other books and other worlds. Suri's character shines the most. I loved following her storyline. All the characters are very complex and I am just blown away by this book. I know this is a standalone for now, but I can't wait for Sanderson to release the next installment. This book, of course, gets 5 stars. Then I read A Lady of Persuasion by Tessa Dare. So this is the 3rd book in the Wanton Dairymaid trilogy. It's the Regency period, and we follow Isabel Grayson as she searches for a wealthy and powerful husband. This is where Sir Tobias Aldrich comes in, and he's out to get revenge. So at first, his actions are villainous, but then he's like, man, I really like this woman. So he redoubles his efforts in trying to establish a relationship with her. But Isabel kind of turns her nose up at him because even though he's a sir, he's not at the level of influence that she needs him to be. She doesn't want to marry for love. She wants someone who's rich and influential so that she could have a bigger impact in her efforts in helping the poor and getting more traction for her charity. Before the night is out, they're engaged with the condition that Toby will run for a government position to elevate his status. The characters fell flat. I don't know. It just wasn't happening. I just couldn't stand Isabel and all of her demands, and the way she acted just rubbed me the wrong way. She was just too pushy, and there was also little to no communication between the two, which I was like, really? Come on. But I do have to say that there was a lovely side story going on in the background between 2 characters named Josh and Hedda. And if only their relationship was brought to the forefront, this book would have been so much better. I would have loved to see their interracial relationship develop and see more from them. But we only got to see snippets from them. So I gave this book 2 stars out of 5 stars. Then I read The 4 Winds by Kristin Hanna. This is probably one of the most depressing books I've ever read. The pacing was surprisingly very fast. I would have preferred that we got a little bit more showing rather than telling, but at the end of the day, I kind of liked the way it was executed. Our main character's name is Elsa Martinelli, and she lives on a farm in Texas with her family. She's a hard worker who keeps her head down. She's basically an introvert and doesn't take unnecessary risks. So when the rain stops, the land and the crops and the animals start to die. The lack of food and water forces all her neighbors to travel west to California to seek job opportunities. Even though the whole situation is just hopeless, she's extremely reluctant to follow suit. Their living situation has become uninhabitable due to this thing now termed the Dust Bowl. Hannah's descriptions of the dust storms was so like, wow. It's not until something happens that Elsa gives in and starts her perilous journey across the Great Plains. It's 1934 and the family is constantly facing natural disasters. They experience so much hardship. Not only do they have to stress about being impoverished, but they have to deal with cruel and harsh treatments by just ignorant people who think they're better than them just because the people they're sneering at are migrants. So it really grates on your nerves. The Martinelli family's fate is inescapable, and I had to put this book down just to catch my breath. This book was emotionally draining. These pages are filled with so much despair. I think this book was hard to read at times, especially when it would talk about the animals suffering. But I pushed through, and I think it was worth it. I loved how Elsa was portrayed as a strong mother who's ready to do absolutely anything for her children. She was constantly thinking about them and trying to make the right decisions in impossible situations. The progression of her relationship with her daughter was just wonderful to see as it progressed. I did notice that all of the characters are fairly simplistic and there's not too much to them, but that didn't really hinder my, I don't want to say enjoyment. That doesn't really sound right, but this book was something. I gave this book 4 stars out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. So I went into this knowing I was probably going to like it, but I was so surprised at how much I loved it. For one thing, the whole book is a backdrop of the Opium Wars. The way the author intertwines something as momentous as these events in Chinese history is unto itself just brilliant. I'm still wondering, like, what did I just read? She delivered everything I was hoping for and more. So this book tells the story of a peasant girl named Rin as she struggles to better her situation by studying like crazy to pass this test called the Keju. so that she can be accepted into this military school called Synagard. Everything is stacked against her, but she prevails and things take off from there. So the book is broken into 3 parts, and the first part was more my speed, but the entire book worked in more ways than one. Overall, I was very impressed. It's a solid portrayal of a brutal time in history, and for that I say well done. It was engaging, there was meaning to each page, and it was very effective in showing the monstrosities of war from Rin's perspective. And I appreciated seeing the culture as well. I really enjoyed the build-up of all of Rin's choices and how she goes from almost nothing to something spectacular that ends up burdening her, and it's just heavy with so much consequences. The war is just on such a wide scale. I like the discussion on the usage of opium and how it was just like detrimental. This book was so intense. Some parts were hard for me to read, but I couldn't tear my eyes from the pages. I was like, what? No! It's dark and at times horrifying. I will be reading the sequel very soon. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. So out of these books, I've noticed that 3 of them cover pretty heavy topics, and I did not plan it that way. For the most part, I sort of grabbed these books at random just because they were books I was drawn to. But let me know in the comments, what was the most soul-crushing book you've ever read? Thank you for taking the time to listen and watch. Subscribe so you can see more bookish content. See you next time. Bye!